Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is a revisit on a conversation we had earlier this year on strengthening the creative industries in Rwanda, but this time we're looking at it from a wider perspective, how to boost the creative industries across the region, the East African region. Ahead of the upcoming Rwanda Fashion Week 2019 that starts this weekend, we will discuss various challenges in the creative industry that range from access to finance, cultural exploitation, and more. Joining the show all the way from Nairobi and here for the African Fashion Week is our guest, Mr. Sunny Dolat. And Sunny Dolat is the co-founder of Heva Fund. Sunny, very, very happy to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Good. My name is Diana Mpisi. I'm the host of The Square, and I am joined as always by The Square's resident panelists, the people who make up the show. On my immediate right is Charles Haba. Charles, great to have you on here.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
And also on my left, I'll start with you, Ephraim. Great to have you. Ephraim Wamente.
How are you, Dee?
Good. And Bernard Namata, great to have you on the show as always.
Thank you.
We missed you last week.
I missed you too.
So glad to have you back. And before we kick off like we always do, we're just going to have brief midweek highlights, and I'll start with you, Bernard. I know you have a lot to say. So as you said before the show started, keep it sweet and short.
Yeah, no, my highlight is about companies that are releasing their financials, especially the giants, the ones that enjoy the dominance of the market. As they announce their profits, I think we need to see more accountability in terms of what they're doing for social good. And that means when they do social good, no strings attached.
What do you mean by social good, no strings attached?
I mean, for instance, if MTN is going to fund a school, it should just do that and not try to put in a clause that says MTN is the only company that can supply services at that company.
Does that happen? Does that happen?
I mean, we know that private businesses never do things for free as such. Either they will milk it in terms of marketing, but we need to see more concrete, social good.
But this is a simple. During
is
the
this
Malawi
your weekly
election,
recap?
I'll come to my
you're
weekly recap. I'm just going to drop a comment around this. In Malawi, there's an MP who built a house for a vulnerable elderly woman. Now, when the MP lost, the elderly woman celebrated, and the MP went and demolished the house. Yes. So obviously, there's that moral argument about that, and I think it's the same thing. If I'm going to give you, if I'm going to support your school, and then you go to my competitor and you support his business, when I take from my pocket to support you, I feel like it obviously has there's a moral question or a moral argument there. But my highlight of the week is around the Ebola crisis in neighboring DRC. It's happening in North Kivu. Apparently, they've reached 2,000 cases. And they say that it took about 3 months to go from 0 to 1,000, or 6 months. It was a decent period, but they said it took 1 month to go from 1,000 to 2,000.
2,000 cases of Ebola.
Yeah, so it's a real issue. And at the heart of it is this the insurgencies that are happening, where you find that rebel groups are attacking facilities or attacking doctors who are going to help. So it's an alarming situation, and hopefully there'll be a solution soon to it.
I know you don't have a midweek recap, or did you change your mind?
Yeah, no, I'm just happy to dive into the topic, but just one comment for Bana. He who plays the piper calls the tune. Is that how they say it? I am reminded, I've been in sports administration for more than half of my life. And one of the things that you'll always come across whenever you're seeking sponsorship is that there is no way BK is going to finance a golf tournament, for example, sponsor a golf tournament, and you expect that guys are going to play that golf tournament in Equity Bank t-shirts. There's just no way, Bana. Be realistic. Come down to earth.
I love where we're going with this convo. I feel like it's a juicy debate, but maybe for for next week.
Yes.
But I really like where we're going with that. So, Mr. Dolat, Sunny, thank you for joining the show. And we're here to talk about the creative industries, but I think we're going to weigh a bit heavily on fashion because that's not only your background, but it's ahead of the Rwanda Fashion Week.
Yeah.
And my first question is to you, but it's also open to my fellow panelists on the square, and it's to do with access to finance for most of these businesses in the creative industry. So you've been described as a Kenyan fashion stylist, creative director, and production designer, and you're currently in Rwanda, like I said earlier on, for Rwanda Fashion Week. Can you shed more light, just to start with what Heva Fund does? The company that you co-founded, in terms of bridging the gap in terms of financial inclusion for companies in the creative industries.
Sure. I'd actually like to take it back a little bit and give a bit more context. So I also work for an arts organization called the Nest Collective. It's an arts collective. It's an artist collective based in Nairobi, and that's existed for the past 8 years. And because the collective is made up of artists, for us, at various points of our career, we've always faced the issue of access to finance, right? So one of us, a photographer, someone had to figure out how do you raise money for lights. So different points of our lives, all of us had like 9-to-5 jobs in like banks. I used to work at a hotel. I have a background in hospitality. And so, you know, that whole thing where you kind of like take some of your salary to fund like your creative passion. And we realized that that's what a lot of our friends were doing in the space. And so we had this wild idea to start a fund. None of us studied finance, which is a bit ridiculous. But yeah, we decided to start a fund, and it's a fund for artists by artists.
This is in Nairobi?
Yeah. And I think that everyone was very skeptical because we were very kind of like wide-eyed and very optimistic. And the creative sector is assumed to be one of the riskiest sectors. And so every bank we met with were like, artists? I mean, I don't know. And so everyone, like all the financial institutions, were really reluctant to partner. And so we just decided to put in our own money. And so we started out by investing in 3 value chains, and that was fashion, music, and interiors. And then we later on expanded to include like photography and a few other value chains. And this year we dive into a few other, even more value chains, including gaming. But yeah, that's kind of like where Heva came from. And we firmly believe that the creative sector will provide the jobs of the future. If you look at employment and where the numbers are now, where the youth are going, creative industries is a big part. If you look at the creative sector's contribution in Sweden and the UK, it's significant, and governments have been starting to notice. And so that's something that we wanted to tap in quite early. And so we rolled out in Kenya first, and I've slowly been reaching out into East Africa. I guess the goal and the hope and the dream is to cover the entire continent at some point. But we're quite a lean team. We're a team of 10. There's only so much we can do at this point.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so Heva aims to I guess address 3 issues. One is access to finance. So the way that Heva is set up is that it's divided into 3 arms. There's Heva Capital, and Heva Capital gives out money. So we invest in businesses through 4 funds. So this year, between January and now, we've invested $1 million through 3 funds. The first fund is a growth fund, which is for medium-sized businesses. So businesses that are looking for investment for up to $500,000. No, that's a lie. 100. I'm thinking of like, my mind is doing this weird thing between like dollars and like Kenya shillings.
Yes.
No, between $100,000 and $300,000. Yes. So that's for medium-sized businesses. And then we also have a women's fund. So women-owned businesses within the creative sector. And then we also have a cultural heritage fund. And that's for businesses that are working within the cultural heritage space. And then we also still have our early stage financing, and that's for younger businesses that are looking for smaller tickets, so like anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000 in investment. So that's Heva Capital. And then there's Heva Forum, and Heva Forum is about capacity building and trainings and workshops. So those we've been doing in East Africa, and that's where our partnership with Collective RW kind of like started. So we came first to Rwanda 3 years ago to do a scoping study because we wanted to understand what the creative sector in Rwanda looked like. So we spent some time here, and I've been here quite regularly after that. And our relationship with Collective has been pretty phenomenal. We've had them come to Nairobi for market opportunities, I think, thrice. The last time they were there was in November for a craft fair. And it's an ongoing partnership. I think they're going to come over in November and December again this year. and we are fostering the same kind of relationship with a group in Ethiopia. So that's all the stuff that HIVA Forum does, and then there's HIVA Insights, which is just like research and research and research and research.
So you conduct a lot of research. Do you share it?
We do.
The insights that
a lot of our research is available on our websites. When we started HIVA, one of the things that we needed, as with everything, is that you need the data to justify proof of concept. And we couldn't find it. And so we went around asking, like, okay, does anyone have like stats on film and how film is doing? Does anyone have stats on fashion? And guys were just like, I mean, we don't. We have maybe like one paper. And so a lot of the research we've always been having to do ourselves, which has meant that our rollout has been much slower. So like even now, as we're rolling out investment in gaming, and gaming is a value system for us, we're having to conduct the research ourselves because we don't have that research available at the moment. So that's what HIVA Insights does. So those are kind of like the three arms of HIVA.
And just very quickly, I know you remember in our show earlier this year when we talked about strengthening the creative industry in Rwanda, one of the biggest sort of pitfalls in the country, in Rwanda specifically, with regards to this, is the lack of data.
Yeah.
The lack of data for, I remember, for photographers, for filmmakers. There's basically and that's why I'm interested to see the scoping study that you did on Rwanda. What were some of the findings? And is this information you're sharing with various institutions that are in charge of pushing for the creative industry in Rwanda?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first scoping we did obviously leaned quite heavily on fashion because we identified Collective and obviously they work in the fashion space, and so we worked and studied them. The thing that was interesting was to see the issues around accessing of raw materials, accessing of textiles, but it was also interesting to see that the government had already taken steps to ease that. Because I think, and I hope I'm not quoting this wrong, but I think the import tax on importation of fabric was taken out. So that makes accessing fabric a lot easier. Whereas for us in Kenya, there's still there's an import tax of 35%. And so designers have a really hard time bringing in raw materials, right? It was also really interesting to see that every single designer that we interviewed had a store, right? And that's completely opposite of Kenya, whereby I'd say 80% of the designers who work in Kenya don't have stores because real estate is so expensive. So they either sell through kind of like collective stores or they sell online.
That's an interesting comparative analysis because it's true a lot of our designers, especially the big names, all have their own locations, so to speak.
The price points of the designers here are quite interesting. And
more expensive or less expensive?
Less.
In Rwanda?
By far.
You know that we complain about made in Rwanda.
Almost half.
Seriously?
And which is why every time we've brought Rwandan designers to Nairobi, they've done exceptionally well.
Yes.
Like at BizBaz in November last year, the sales were incredible, and like we were obviously like helping around and we were seeing the sales and we're like, this is a lot of money. And the demand is because of the price points. So you guys hit this kind of like magic price point of between like $80 and $120, which I feel like is where a lot of people shop comfortably. Actually, no, between 50 and 120. And I feel like a lot of spend is spent there, right?
If you don't mind, and this is just me like digressing a bit.
Sure.
Why do you think that's the case? Do you think it comes back to like what you said about the excise duty that is levied on the raw materials?
I think so.
Is that the only reason? Is it because labor is cheaper here? Why do you think that Rwandan designers have that at least price advantage? Because we believe they're expensive.
Yeah.
So in your own opinion, and even just from the findings you've seen, why do you think they're able to sell at an affordable price?
I think some of the challenges actually end up working to the designer's advantage. So because Rwanda doesn't necessarily have a textile industry, it means that a lot of the designers have to buy the fabric in bulk. So economies of scale. So they're buying all this fabric from whether it's China or Dubai, but they're buying it in like all these massive rolls. So it's a lot cheaper, right? A lot of them are working with small ateliers, so they're managing a small labor force. I actually don't know what the minimum wage is here.
If we have one.
We don't want to talk about the minimum wage.
So yes, it's all these like small things. And I also think that the Rwandan designers really understand the Rwandan market, and so they ensure that everything that they're making fits within this price point that's comfortable for the market. Because for us, a lot of designers, kind of like the big designers, hit a price point of between $180 and $320.
Really? But it's very interesting to have you here, especially from, talking about the East African region, but to really give a comparative analysis, because a lot of us in Rwanda who don't have this information, we really cry about the high prices of made in Rwanda. And now you're telling us that it's actually much cheaper in the region. Yes, Brenna in the frame.
I think it could be explained by the capacity. We have to look at incomes.
Yeah, I was going to say that. The purchasing power.
The purchasing
power, yes, is much higher in Kenya. So I'm sure even for the 150, there are people who would prefer to have it at even 250. Because of the purchasing power and status, it's a big deal. For us here, when you look at the purchasing power, it's still really
it's really low.
Yeah.
So while on one hand it may look like the pricing is fair, but for most of us ordinary people, it's actually too much. And the question is, how do you, for instance, promote made in Rwanda for Rwanda? For Rwandans, for ordinary Rwandans. Because as it is at the moment, you'll find that our designers, on average, will probably do a few pieces, at most probably 30 or 50. So it's not yet at that scale where, so...
But maybe before, just to supplement onto what Bana is saying, I think the Kenyan designers have a choice in terms of how they stand out. Because the typical Kenyan consumer is spoiled for choice. You walk into any shopping mall in Nairobi or Mombasa or Eldoret or Nakuru, and the brands that are in those malls are, you'll have Zara at the extreme end, you'll have Pep, Mr. Price, Ackermans, LC Waikiki, Woolworths, mention it. You're really spoiled for choice. So what does a typical Kenyan designer do in such a very competitive space? Is they stand out in terms of quality and therefore price. Which is not necessarily the case in Rwanda. I'll ask you to mention 2-3 brand names and you will struggle to come across them.
You mean international brand names?
Yes. So therefore, it's a huge opportunity for our local designers to capitalize on that. So that by the time the regional, international brand names are setting up foot there into Rwanda, we have kind of gotten accustomed, and the local brands have positioned themselves. But that said, though, therefore, I think credit needs to be given too for the whole Made in Rwanda campaign and all the incentives and deliberate moves that are there. Go to a meeting on Friday, irrespective of the institution, you'll see everyone is wearing Made in Rwanda. You go to a Gusaba these days, on the square every Wednesday, it's going to be Made in Rwanda. So that deliberate move, even though it's comparatively, it's coming on board a little late if you're going to compare with our South African neighbors and the other guys. We're coming on a little late, but we're coming in very, very aggressively. And if our designers can look at that as an opportunity and capitalize on it, by the time the other brands are coming in, I think they'll have already taken off.
I want to just now at least go back to the financing bit.
But before you do you remember the question Brenna asked you? Because Charlie came in and then we're going to Ephraim.
I knew I had a response for something and I can't remember what it is.
Because I'd like him to just briefly answer. And Brenna, it was to do with asking him from his perspective. Because you say they have a higher purchasing power and so forth. And so
yes, of course.
Rwanda for Rwanda.
Yeah. I think, here's the thing, is that the made-in movements will always cost a bit more, right? And it's all these factors that will play in, like access to finance and all these things, because everyone's producing on a smaller scale. And so in many places, they cost a bit more, and understandably. And in many ways, buying into made-in is an act of patriotism, right? I think for me, one of the most beautiful things I saw was last year when I was here for the show again. I somehow ended up at the Independence Day party. at the convention center. And I was walking around and I was like, but everyone is wearing someone I know. And I was like, but that's Uzi and that's Motions and that's Obasa and that's Sonia. I have never seen that in Nairobi. I could easily say that I think every third person I saw was wearing a Rwandan designer, and that's incredibly beautiful, right? So in many ways, I feel like Rwanda for me it's the bar for buying into the made in movement, right? I completely agree about purchasing power, but I feel like the thing where our designers have failed and we have failed is that we're catering to a fragment of the market, which is this top tier.
Absolutely.
And it's such a small fraction, it's a single-digit percentage, and then you have majority of the country that lies here. And so what can we give them that's made in Rwanda and that's made beautifully and, and is still something that they can afford? Because there's such a hunger, I think that to be able to wear something that's well made, and that it's made home, wherever home is for you, I think people have it gives people such pride, because then you go and you're like, do you know I'm wearing a Rwandan designer? Do you know, and so it's now our duty, I guess, as everyone else, whether it's the creatives, whether it's the institutions who are finance, whether it's government, to be able to facilitate, right? Because, like, for instance, now with a lot of the designers who are in Rwanda, the product is good, the quality is fantastic.
We'll come to fantastic later.
I stand by fantastic. What a lot of them need is just to scale up, right?
Scale.
Because then what it means that, like, for instance, if you give a brand like Otbaso investment of X million dollars, shillings, it means that they can hire more tailors, it means they can move to a bigger space, it means that their production capacity increases, which means that they're producing higher volumes, which means that the price can come down, And
there's a level of industrialization.
Exactly,
yes.
Right? Or alternatively, if then we're able to set up factories where designers then don't have to set up their own factories and their own manufacturing, but they can outsource, but then they're able to outsource and produce pieces at $20, $30, which means that they can then retail them at like that magical price point. It means that these brands can really start to go mainstream, because the thing that we all struggle with is like, what's our Mr. Price? What's our Zara? Because we know what the buy-in to those brands is. And again, it's price point. It'll always come down to price. And I think that we have all the elements to start to create that. And so I guess even for us as Hiva is to start to have creatives move around, is that, you have the designers in Rwanda and they're doing well in Rwanda, but when you bring them to Kenya, they're hitting a price point that people are so hungry for and they want the product. So they're doing well also in Kenya. And so it makes us curious, like, what happens when you take the Rwandans also to Ethiopia and you bring the Ethiopians here, like, what happens and what's this East African community, that we keep on talking about. So I hope that answers your question.
No, so I wanted to talk about the financing bit. There's this, I don't want to call it a running joke, but it's actually true, that in the region, at least on the continent, that investment capital has a color. Actually, so
I know this. I think we've talked about it before.
yeah,
but go ahead.
so actually, I remember I went into a plenary session. It was actually in Nairobi, at like a closed session at an investment conference, and somebody called a spade and said, capital that flows into East Africa has a color, meaning skin color.
That it's white.
That it's white. That it only goes to ventures with white people at the heads of them, or co-founded by white people. Then another person says, actually, capital has a gender.
Yeah.
And then one person, so when people started going back and forth, somebody said, actually, capital has a color and a gender. It only goes to white males. And I think I just wanted to tap into, because I know funds normally work as intermediaries. You get high finance, either high net worth individuals, or family offices, or even larger entities that normally use smaller funds to channel funds through to invest in certain sectors. What has been your experience in trying to raise money, based on even what I've said? Because I don't anticipate any African indigenous high finance fund or high net worth individuals understanding the importance of of the creative sector. So I'm assuming only the Western world would understand why it's important to invest in fashion or invest in photography or music. And in that case, when you go to them to say, okay, we want to invest in this, what's normally the response?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, Jesus. But yes, I agree. So for us to be able to really prove that we were committed to what we were trying to start, we had to put our own money. So the first ever investor in Hiva was us, was Nest, right? A lot of the partners that we've had along the way, we've had partners who've come for shorter periods, we've had partners who come for longer periods. The easiest thing to sell has always been Hiva Forum and capacity buildings, because that's easy for people to understand, right? It's like, yeah, get X amount of money, do these workshops, great. We'll give evaluation forms, we'll measure, da-da-da-da-da-da. But being able to access money to give out has been incredibly tricky for us, right? And I guess it's been helpful that the fund, the money that we give out are loans, so they come back and we plow them out and we plow them back in and they go out again. And so it's kind of like grown like that.
So it's a debt fund?
It is a debt fund.
Okay.
But then for the Cultural Heritage Fund, we have given a few grants. But then, like, for instance, this year for the 3 funds, we partnered with 3 European organizations. So the Growth Fund, that's a partnership with the French Agency Development. The Cultural Heritage Fund, that's a partnership with the British Council. The Women's Fund, that's a partnership with the Goethe Institute. So yeah, sadly,
But in all these funding bodies that you mentioned, I see they're all, sort of
intergovernmental,
but also intergovernmental, INGOs. You have the Goethe Institute, you have the British Council.
Yeah.
Do you have any Kenyan institutions that act as funders?
Nest.
Nest. But Nest is, you started it.
Yes.
You didn't, receive, it's the people who started Nest and Hiva who came together and funded it.
Yeah.
But there are no other Kenyan bodies that
we have.
I think maybe just to get him off the hook a little bit.
I need to understand that you don't.
No,
because that says a lot. It speaks volumes.
Not at the moment. No, not at the moment. We have had a few conversations with various ministries, and I think we will get a Kenyan partner sometime this year, actually. But so far in our past, no, we haven't.
Okay. And I'm assuming it's on the basis that people don't necessarily believe as much in the value of it. I think we talked about this.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so much that they don't believe. Again, like, governments understand data, right? Like, the creative industry in Kenya jumped at the moment when there's a small group of people who gave documents to the government that showed that the creative industry in, I think it was the year 2014, had brought in the same amount of money as mining. And that's how you get the government's attention, because that's how governments understand things.
It's like hard facts.
They're like, exactly. It's hard facts. And the thing is that, like, governments will always lean towards the things that they understand. So, like, for us, they understand agriculture, tourism. Like, those are the things they're like, yes, this one, we know this,
Trust me,
We've been
they do it.
But they try to.
But there's something you really...
Yes, I just wanted you to give us perspective in terms of the missed opportunities, as we continue to let the foreigners fund our creative sector.
Yeah.
Because currently, I think part of why we have a problem with sort of colonization of our creative industry is that our artists begin to create with the donor in mind.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you know the Germans are funding you, and then you take time to find out what are Germans interested in.
Yeah.
So if you could give us a sense of the missed opportunities in terms of job creation, but also in terms of the actual,
Yeah, I think one of the most unfortunate things is that obviously, like, usually with foreign donors, they'll come for a period, right? And so sometimes it can be tricky to really form very long-lasting relationships, which I think are the things that local partners are able to do, because you're based in the same city. And like, I remember there was a time, I think it was 2000 and I'm tempted to say 2015 or 2014, but like the whole of Europe, all the arts and culture funding was cut. almost every single country. And so all the institutions around the world, whether it was the Goethe Institute or organizations like HIVOS or Alliance Française, everyone was like, yeah, we have to like reduce our programming, scale down because, you know, arts funding has been cut. And I think that even for them, that's always, if ever the economy is struggling, the first thing to go will always be arts and culture funding. It's the thing they're like,
always.
no.
Yeah.
This,
Even
no.
in the US,
yeah,
it's the same thing.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
it's the first thing to get cut.
Yeah.
But I'd like us to go to another issue to do with cultural exploitation.
Okay.
And I'm basing this, you know, I think it was 2014, if I'm not mistaken, where there was a Louis Vuitton fashion show, and they had culturally appropriated Maasai, Kitenge, and I think a lot of Kenyans went up in arms. So, but just to you and later on to the resident panelists, we know that, you know, the aim of the Rwanda Fashion Week, started by Collective, I think in 2016, for the last 4 years, was to really put Rwanda on the global fashion map, which I think it has.
Yeah, I think it has too.
As well as promote the Made in Rwanda campaign, which I think it has, and it's doing a commendable job. But what happens when locally made brands or products are appropriated or exploited by bigger international brands? You know, what happens? Like, how do we prevent that from happening? How can countries actually protect their local brands against this sort of thing happening? And I remember there's a time we were somewhere and someone mentioned that and I'm not sure if I'm mistaken because I need to double check this info, that the Agasete motif is actually owned by some random company in Japan. Did you know that? Have you heard of that?
I can tell you. I can tell you.
Like the Agasete motif that
I can tell you that. Should I name names? There's a particular global brand. I know. There's a particular global brand that has a foundation that operates in Rwanda. Now they took certain designs and they trademarked them in the UK.
Yes.
And I found this out in 2016 when we were preparing for World Economic Forum, and one of the documents, the flyers that were produced, had one of the patterns. The individual who was in charge of it said, "You see this pattern?" And he went into his computer. He says, "It's owned by us."
Which is crazy. But yes, Sunny, how do you prevent this from happening? And can you also give examples on a scale where it really happened?
There's this deeply problematic habit and tendency that the global north has, which is to take. They can take whatever they want, right? They took countries, you know.
To start with.
And it's a thing that we see happening so much. So like that was them just taking, right? That you enter a place and you assume that things don't belong to people, and just because there's no paperwork that exists, that it doesn't belong to a people in the same way, and so you can just take it. And it's the same thing that happened with Vuitton. It's the same thing that I feel like there's something else that happened this year.
Disney Hakuna Matata.
Disney Hakuna Matata. There's a time when in Japan
there's the Vuvuzela as well.
There's the Vuvuzela.
What do you mean? The Vuvuzela is?
It's belongs to some Chinese.
The design of the Vuvuzela, which is supposed to represent an African horn. Chinese.
There's a time when the Kenyan government, much to their surprise, I think they'd gone somewhere for something, and then, so you know we have our baskets and we call them kyondos.
Yeah, kyondos, yes.
And they discovered that the name kyondo had been trademarked in Japan.
In Japan, yes.
Yeah, and so suddenly the Kenyan government was being told, no, you can't use kyondo. They're like, I'm sorry, what? And finally, I think we finally got it back a year ago.
Okay.
And I think that globally we're living in a very odd time and an odd space, because everything is online and everything is on social media, and so people see these things and they just kind of you take and you use. So for instance on Instagram there's a really big account called Diet Prada, and Diet Prada exists to just kind of call out designers who are copying work of other designers or other creatives. And it's challenging to track, again, because it's someone who'll see a motions print on Instagram and they live in Russia, and they'll just be like, sure, I'll do the same thing, I'll never be caught. So I'm I don't even know how you track it, but I feel obviously government plays a big role, so to be able to have the support of the government, which I feel like you guys have. I was having a conversation with, actually, the first time when we came, and we're hearing from members of the collective that like organizations like RDB, RCB are very responsive, and they have regular meetings with the sector, and they hear and they actually action a lot of the stuff that a lot of the recommendations that are made. So I think there's a really big government part.
I'd want to, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Sorry. I think I'd want to come in and talk about, maybe from my perspective, when I look at something like this, I think it comes back to the conversation we had in the first part of the show, when we talked about who actually funds this stuff. I mean, he actually said it when we're talking about our highlights of the week. I mean, at the end of the day, if MTN is going to if they're going to give you money for some program, you're going to have to use their internet or use their services. It's in this context, I think also we have to be realistic. I'll give you the simple example of the Disney Hakuna Matata situation. Right? It was the first time on a global stage, at least in recent history, or at least at that scale, through Lion King, that the word Hakuna Matata was heard. Now, what ends up happening is that this story gets told by Disney on a global stage. So they almost lay claim to the international recognition of this word. So the question then comes in is that, okay, realistically, how do we then position ourselves, because you're talking about solutions, how do we then position ourselves to make sure that if we want to protect our art, at least if we enter into a relationship with a funder, we make it very clear that all they're doing is giving us resources. And if they say they can't do it, we have internal ways of doing it. And I know in Rwanda, I know why we have been so fortunate enough that, again, RDB and RCB have been so responsive. It fits perfectly into the MICE strategy. So it fits perfectly into this agenda that the government has, saying, we want to bring people to this country. Let's also give them a part of us that they can take back, so that they can come back again. Now, it fits perfectly, so they invest in it. And that's the same thing. And you do insights. How can we show high net worth individuals in Kenya, the Chris Kirubis of this world, that look, you have a lot of money. If you just put aside $100,000 to invest in the creative sector, we could actually have a situation where people can't expropriate our culture, because we would already be telling that story. So when Louis Vuitton starts to put out designs, guys will be like, but you stole that from a designer in Kenya called so-and-so.
But here's the thing, is that the appropriation will happen regardless of who's investing, right? Because the appropriation is, there's so many layers to how and why it happens. Because I talked about taking, but then there's also a thing about permission, right? If you're an African creative, the expectation is that you take from your culture only, all the time, right? So if a Rwandan designer was suddenly supposed to do a collection inspired by, I don't know, like the Ming Dynasty, the entire world would be like, but why? Like, can't you be inspired by the Migongo, right? But then brands and creatives from the global north have permission to access inspiration from everywhere, which is why Chanel for one season will be inspired by Egyptian pharaohs, and the next season will be inspired by Russian aristocracy, and the next season will be inspired by...
I think one way of dealing with this, I feel like we're kind of going round and round, and I want us to move to the next part of the conversation, is maybe like giving credit where it's due. So for instance, that Louis Vuitton show, that particular... when it happened, did they give credit, this is influenced or this is inspired by the Maasai people who come from Kenya? Did that happen? It didn't. Yeah. So because in this day and age, you can't track, you can't have a paper trail, you can't, but at least if there's, a sort of a public acknowledgement to these sort of brands that are in a public fora, to just source the source of inspiration or the source of, that sort of thing. I think that's what would...
I don't think the acknowledgement is enough, right? I also think that,
but it's a starting point.
It's with these brands, we have to ask more, right? It's a big brand, so they need to do more. Like a small brand, you can be like, you can put it in your teeth. And like as a brand that's a multi-million-dollar brand, I'm like, no, you have to do more. And that was the thing with Vuitton. It's like, if you're going to be inspired by people, you have to ensure that some money goes to them. Right? And I think that was the biggest disappointment, is that then, yes, be inspired by them, but are you giving them any piecework? Like, is there a part of the collection that's being produced by those communities? And if not, because usually what people do is that they produce those collections and then they go and shoot them in those communities. They fly in 5 big models, go shoot with the manyatas, with a few animals, and fly everyone out. And I'm like, there has to be some responsibility, and there has to be duty of care. So is there money moving towards that community? And what else have you done to better their lives? Because a lot of these communities are marginalized, right? So the Maasai, like, you find one well here, the next well is like an hour walk away. So, and I'm like, you have so much money, you have to do more, you have to do so much more. So I'm like, make sure some money goes to them, make sure you do something to make the community better. Yeah.
Berna?
I want to shift this discussion. I feel
But
like
we need to be
we can't be crybabies. You know, we can't be
Yes,
crybabies. I mean, all the time crying. You know, Africa, they are taking so much from us. That what are we doing about it? What are we doing about it?
Yeah.
Because already, if our governments are not doing enough in terms of intellectual property, for instance, how do you expect that you deal with a global brand? Because these guys, like he said, you know, going back to the highlight, they're in the business of making money, you know. So if they take up if they see any opportunity anywhere around the world, they will go for it. And it goes back at home. If these guys fly in, are you taxing them? Most of the time, no.
The onus is on us. I
You know,
totally agree.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I totally
So,
agree. We
you
need
know,
to also do much more.
Yeah, we have to do
protect,
more. Yes,
to
and to
protect
the
our
extent that, for now, we don't even appreciate creativity. We don't appreciate the creative industry. Then people can do whatever they want with us.
We shouldn't complain then when it's taken advantage of. If
yeah,
we're
we
not even
shouldn't.
doing
We
our best
shouldn't.
to protect
Yes.
it.
We should, you know.
I totally agree. I want Charlie to weigh in. You've been awfully quiet.
No, I've been,
and I know you usually have a lot to say, but would you like to weigh in?
just a few things. One, you see, the creative industry is very, very broad, and I want to talk about progress and how people take advantage of the opportunities. There was one particular designer, again, fashion, and then I'll go to another sector. There are these two girls, Kevin and Isolde. They have a brand. I think it's Uzuri KY. To show why they had their footwear. Yes, very good footwear. You need to wear a pair of sandals, or buy one for your girlfriend or ex. Yes, I think they need to improve on their men's selection. I've had that conversation with them a few times. But looking at where they have grown, and I want to give, I just picked this from Heva's training aspect. I know they got a bit of support from the IFC when they were starting off. But the way these girls have propelled, and you look at the quality and the way they are now positioning themselves globally is extremely impressive. But I always challenge them. You see, it's a bit of a mindset thing that I again, to the other creative thing of my friend Arthur there and his comedy shows. I always challenge these guys. I had a conversation with Michael and Gisenyi last week, saying, Gazi, the biggest problem you have with a lot of our artists is that once they have a Mercedes-Benz, they don't think of buying a Jaguar. So they have arrived. They have arrived. There's a very, you know, the point, Bana, you're raising around governments. If governments do for them a lot and they control the space, they will think they have arrived. And I always challenge this guy and say, take up space in another mall. You're already doing this in this mall. It's working. You have extended. You have taken up more space. You've moved to the airport. So, Arthur, you're now doing a one-man show from 15 minutes. 2-3 years ago, you're doing a one-man show for 1.5 hours. Take it a notch higher. You should be, like the biggest YouTube channel or something like that. But I think that's where, Bana, our creative industry, the artists themselves, are not thinking as big as they should be. They tend to sort of settle for less. Their comfort zone is so neared to them. Yeah.
I don't think that's quite it. I think everyone is. There's no template for this thing. We, as Africans, we have no template. We're all figuring it out. I think the global North has the advantage of having had figured it out a long time ago. So if you're starting a fashion brand, you have many references. We don't have the luxury of such references, and so people are figuring out a lot of things on their own, and they're navigating things that they've never navigated before. They don't really know anyone who's navigated a similar space, and so everyone's kind of like very risk averse. And so you're right in that we are very, we think small, but I think it's that we think small because we're trying to protect ourselves and to protect our businesses. And And which is why when all these things unlock, I think they unlock the creatives also, because then the creatives are a lot bolder and they feel a lot more confident to make bigger decisions, right? So the way that we grow a lot of our creatives, you'll notice that people will start with like, if it's a musician, they'll put like one song on YouTube, and then they'll be like, okay, people like it, then I can do like 4 songs, and then I can do
you
an
do a
album.
collabo,
Exactly,
and then
exactly. And it's because like people are financing themselves, like all those things, like you're borrowing money from your folks, and I think that that's the honest reality of where we are as an industry in majority of the continent, maybe with the exception of like South Africa. But I feel like the things are starting to unlock slowly, and so we're starting to see creatives becoming more and more confident. Like, so like Sauti Sol, I've known them for such a long time. And like in the public eye, Sauti Sol started at a point. And I think that was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. But they've been at it for so long. They've been at it for I think like 8, maybe like 9 years, you know? And for me, seeing them through that period has been so remarkable. Because they started exactly the same way. They were very unsure about the things that they were doing, because they're like, is it going to work? We don't really know who to ask, and you know. So I hear what you're saying, but I think, yeah.
There's no template for it at the same time.
Yeah.
I just want to go, before we go to a Twitter feed, I want to go to the next question, which is to do with, so based on the research that you did, and I just want, like, on behalf of the panel and our viewers, to understand the level of industrialization that's going on in the creative industry. I know it's not much, but if you can tell us what are the fastest growing and highest potential sectors in the creative industry regionally, because I know you've been Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, so forth and so on. And also, what is the level of industrialization in these sectors?
I'm a bit biased in because I'll always say fashion. Fashion is like where. But like Ethiopia is really interesting in terms of like their strategy to become a manufacturing hub, the next manufacturing hub in the world. Because I think it was last year, China said that they don't want, that the Made in China brand has been damaged, and so that they want to reclaim it. So Made in China now means like cheap quality, and it's kind of like a lot of like really just, you know. I'm trying to look for a nice word. Like really just.
Made in China.
Negative.
It's made in China.
It has very many.
Negative.
Made in China is made in
exactly.
China.
It's almost like used as an insult, you know.
Yes.
And so they're like,
I just on a lighter note, I went to the Made in Rwanda Expo, and I bought a very nice pair of moccasins by a Rwandan company. I think they're called Kigali Leather Company or Rwanda Leather Company, something like that. So you know the strings that you find on the moccasins, yes. So I wore the shoes there. So I removed my shoes and packed the ones and I
you're wearing and you wore them there.
I walked from the shop to my car, and one of the strings had jumped up.
Oh no!
So I took a picture. Luckily for me, I knew one of the owners of the brand.
Yes.
I took a picture and I sent it to him.
And you're like, what's happening?
So, one of my colleagues at work, he told me, Charles, these shoes are not made in Rwanda. They're made in China.
Oh dear.
Oh, wow.
And the reason is because that company is owned by a Chinese.
There you
If they were made in Rwanda, the guy would have bothered. And he was a bit indifferent because I had left. You know, by the time I realized I'd left, I told him, can I take the shoes to UTC or, you know, somewhere else where you have an outlet?
Yeah.
And into UTC, and the guys at UTC told me, you got the shoes at Made in Rwanda Expo. Go back to Made in Rwanda Expo.
That's terrible.
So yes, Made in China. They were made in China. They were not made in Rwanda.
So China want to reclaim Made in China because they have the capacity to produce really fantastic quality and finishing, and so their goal is to export. It's something ridiculous, like 3 million jobs, right? I think by the year 20. In the next like 5-10 years. Now Ethiopia wants to take some of those jobs around manufacturing. So there's been a lot of garment manufacturing units that have been coming up in Ethiopia. The newest one was Hawassa, where PVH, and PVH is a holding company for like Calvin Klein, Speedo, quite like big prominent brands.
Yes.
I think they have about 5 sheds. So that's Ethiopia's strategy. They're like, manufacturing, this is what we're going to do. There's been some problematics, and which is why, like, for me, it was so amusing. Like, I feel like there was 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of like uproar online because people had discovered that Ethiopia labor is really, there's no minimum wage, right? But also the thing that I was like, but you want cheap clothing? Like, I mean, it's like it's no rocket science why people would stop setting up factories in China and suddenly move to Ethiopia. I'm like, there's a whole, exactly. It's like, so, but anyway, like Ethiopia's strategy is to be the next manufacturing place in the world, and so they're investing really heavily in
industry,
in the government,
in government factories. But then what's then happening with that is that they've leaned too much on that side, and so the designers still don't have access to those factories. So the designers are still literally at the same level as everyone else, and yet they have access to all these. They have all these factories in the country. I think for me, fashion is interesting just because of the numbers that are possible. Because it starts right at the farmers. You know, if you look at a place like Ethiopia,
the value chain is much longer.
It's quite a long value chain. So in Ethiopia, you have the cotton farmers, you have ginneries, you have the farmers who have the cows for leather, you have the tanneries, you have the designers, and if you're working with factories,
basically the entire value chain has so much.
The value chain is such a long value chain.
And a rich one.
Yeah, and quite a rich one. And so I'm biased. And depending on who you ask in the office, the answer will always be different. Because the guys who focus on gaming, they'll be like, of course, gaming. What do you mean?
My bias. I'm also a little bit biased. The beauty about clothing, again, and fashion is that you can wear, 7 days a week, 7 different kinds of clothes, from head to toe, and therefore the variety again is much wider, and therefore the scope is much wider. But looking at where artists and comedians have come from and where they are today, by virtue of the fact that you have the likes of Eric Omondi, Basket Mouth, and all these guys who
From
can
Nigeria
stand
to
up,
Kenya to,
and you find
across
a
the
guy
continent.
for crying out loud. About 6 weeks ago, about 2 months ago, we attended the final of Seka Live at the Expo grounds in Gikondo. And you had Basket Mouth, Eric Omondi, Salvador, Chipukizi. And what was going on through my mind, because the hall was packed to the brim, and the tickets were not cheap. Right, I think 20,000. And it was really packed to the brim, and I asked myself, this is a very loud statement. Would this have been the case 3 years ago? Definitely not. Earlier this year, we had attended a show, a one-man show at the convention center. It was full. What does that tell you about it? Look at our own African brand, the likes of Trevor Noah. Look, there's a Malawian guy who performs in the UK, and he's got tens of thousands of people watching him. So that tells you so much about where where we're coming from.
And
if a guy can stand up and is paid $50,000 to make people laugh for 20 minutes, says quite a lot.
Potential. I just want us to quickly go to a Twitter feed, just very quickly go to a Twitter feed before we close this show. And this person on Twitter, this is from Richard Gwajera, who says that creatives find it hard to get loans due to the nature of the business, lack of collateral or uncertainty of demand. He says it's very risky, and says that funding a music show that may not attract audiences, or case in point, the movie Rafiki that was banned. How does Hiva Fund hedge from such? Can you quickly
for funding
that?
A movie show where what's that body of Rwanda that comes and tells people, we don't like that video, you're going to be an outcast of society, you dress up your girls before you shoot them in the video, and how do you expect a fund to put money in
but in less than 30 seconds.
Sure. Which is why some value chains are a bit more tricky to get into. So we haven't gotten into film because it's been quite tricky to figure out. So the value chains that have been easier to figure out are the ones we've gotten into. And because we understand the challenge around
bias
around collateral, is that we don't ask for collateral for some of the funds because everyone's really young, so people don't have title deeds or like houses and cars. Yeah, so that's, yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you very much.
So short.
Sunny. I know it's short. I'd just like to say before we finish that tonight, in collaboration with the Rwanda Fashion Week that's starting on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken,
That's correct.
we are here wearing Rwandan-made designs. Charles is wearing House of Tayo, very beautiful shirt. I'm wearing
House of Tayo, you said?
Yes, House of Tayo.
Thank you, Matthew.
I'm wearing Haute Bazo, lovely black dress. Berna is wearing Uzi Collections,
yeah.
and Ephraim is wearing Motions.
Yeah,
And I'm wearing Orbaso.
And you're wearing Haute Bazo, yeah. So, I mean, and there's so much potential.
Yes.
There's so much
There is.
potential.
There is.
Thank you for joining the show,
Thank you
Sunny.
for having me.
Ephraim, Berna, Charlie,
Pleasure.
always a pleasure having you. Please keep the conversation going using hashtag #TheSquareRW on our social media pages. I'd like to thank our partners as always, Bourbon Coffee as well as Uzi Collections. Have a good night and see you again next week. Thank you.